Continuing our reading of Thomas Watson's A Body of Divinity in Part 3, The Fall, answering question 15 of the Catechism. 2. The sin by which our first parents fell was eating the forbidden fruit, where consider two things. 1. The occasion of it was the serpent's temptation. The devil crept into the serpent and spake in the serpent, as the angel in Balaam's ass, where consider, firstly, the subtlety of Satan's temptation. His wiles are worse than his darts. Satan's subtlety in tempting, firstly, he dealt all along as an impostor. He ushered in his temptation by lies. First lie, ye shall not surely die, Genesis 3:4. Second lie, that God did envy our first parents their happiness. God knows that in the day ye eat, your eyes shall be opened, verse 5. It is God's envying your felicity that he forbids you this tree. Third lie, that they should be thereby made like unto God. Ye shall be as gods, verse 5. Here was his subtlety in tempting. The devil was first a liar, then a murderer. Secondly, in that he set upon our first parents so quickly, before they were confirmed in their obedience. The angels in heaven are fully confirmed in holiness. They are called stars of the morning, Job 38:7. And they are fixed stars. But our first parents were not conformed in their obedience. They were not fixed in their orb of holiness. Though they had a possibility of standing, they had not an impossibility of falling. They were holy but mutable. There was Satan's subtlety in tempting our first parents before they were confirmed in their obedience. Thirdly, his subtlety in tempting was that he set upon Eve first, because he thought she was less able to resist. Satan broke over the hedge where it was weakest. He knew he could more easily insinuate and wind himself into her by a temptation. An expert soldier, when about to storm or enter a castle, observes warily where there is a breach, or how he may enter with more facility. So did Satan, the weaker vessel. He tempted Eve first, because he knew if once he could prevail with her, she would easily draw her husband. Thus the devil handed over a temptation to Job by his wife. Curse God and die. Chapter 2, verse 9. Agrippina poisoned the Emperor Commodus with wine in a perfumed cup, the cup being perfumed and given him by his wife. It was the less suspected. Satan knew a temptation coming to Adam from his wife would be more prevailing and would be less suspected. Oh, bitter! Sometimes relations prove temptations. A wife may be a snare when she dissuades her husband from doing his duty or entices him to evil. Ahab sold himself to work wickedness, whom his wife Jezebel stirred up. 1 Kings 21:25. She blew the coals and made his sin flame out the more. Satan's subtlety was in tempting Adam by his wife. He thought she would draw him to sin. Fourthly, Satan's subtlety in tempting was in assaulting Eve's faith. He would persuade her that God had not spoken truth. Ye shall not surely die. Genesis 3:4. This was Satan's masterpiece, to weaken her faith. When he had shaken that and had brought her once to distrust, then she yielded. She presently put forth her hand to evil. Second, Satan's cruelty in tempting. Soon as Adam was invested in all his glory, the devil, cruelly as it were, the day of Adam's coronation, would dethrone him and bring him and all his posterity under a curse. See how little love Satan has to mankind. He has an implacable antipathy against us, and antipathies can never be reconciled. So much for the occasion of Adam's sin or his being tempted by the serpent. 2. The sin itself, eating the forbidden fruit. This was very heinous, and that it appears in three ways. First, in respect of the person that committed it. Second, the aggravation of the sin. Third, the dreadfulness of the effect. First, it was very heinous in respect of the person that committed it. Adam had excellent and noble endowments. He was illumined with knowledge, embellished with holiness. He knew his duty, and it was as easy to him to obey God's command as to know it. He might have chosen whether he would sin or no, yet he willfully did eat of the forbidden tree. Second, the aggravation of Adam's sin. Wherein did it appear to be so great, you ask? It was but the seizing of an apple. Was it such a great matter to pluck an apple? It was against an infinite God. It was a voluminous sin. There were many twisted together in it, as Cicero says of parricide. He who is guilty of it, he commits many sins in one. So there were many sins in this one sin of Adam. It was a big-bellied sin, a chain with many links. 10 sins were in it. First, incredulity. Our first parents did not believe what the Lord God had spoken was truth. God said, "They shall die the death in the day they eat of that tree." They believed not that they should die. They could not be persuaded that such fair fruit had death at the door. Thus by unbelief they made God a liar. Nay, which was worse, they believed the devil rather than God. Second, unthankfulness, which is the epitome of all sin. Adam's sin was committed in the midst of paradise. God had enriched him with variety of mercies. He had stamped his own image upon him. He had made him Lord of the world, gave him of all the trees of the garden to eat, one only excepted, and now to take of that tree? This was high ingratitude. It was like the dye to the wool which makes it crimson. When Adam's eyes were opened and he saw what he had done, well might he be ashamed and hide himself. How could he who sinned in the midst of paradise look God in the face without blushing? Thirdly, in Adam's sin was discontent. Had he not been discontented, he never would have sought to have altered his condition. Adam, one would think, had enough. He differed but little from the angels. He had the robe of innocence to clothe him, and the glory of paradise to crown him. Yet he was not content. He would have more. He would have above the ordinary rank of creatures. How wide was Adam's heart that a whole world could not fill it. Fourthly, pride, in that he would be like God. This worm that was but newly crept out of the dust now aspired after deity. "Ye shall be as God," said Satan, and Adam hoped to have been so indeed. He supposed the tree of knowledge would have anointed his eyes and made him omniscient. But by climbing too high, he got a fall. Fifthly, disobedience. God said, "Thou shalt not eat of the tree," but he would eat of it, though it cost him his life. Disobedience is a sin against equity. It is right we should serve him from whom we have our subsistence. God gave Adam his allowance, therefore it was but right he should give God his allegiance. How could God endure to see his laws trampled upon before his face? This made him place a flaming sword at the end of the garden. Sixthly, curiosity. He meddled with that which was out of his sphere and did not belong to him. God smote the men of Beth-Shemesh for looking into the ark, 1 Samuel 6:19. Adam would be prying into God's secrets and tasting what was forbidden. Seventhly, wantonness. Though Adam had a choice of all the other trees, yet his palate grew wanton, and he must have this tree. Like Israel, God sent them manna, angels' food, aye, but they had a hankering after quail. It was not enough that God supplied their wants unless he should satisfy their lusts. Adam had not only for necessity, but for delight, yet his wanton palate lusted after forbidden fruit. Eighthly, sacrilege. The tree of knowledge was none of Adam's, yet he took of it, and did sacrilegiously rob God of his due. It was counted a great crime in Harpalus to rob the temple and to steal the silver vessels, so it was in Adam to steal fruit from that tree which God had peculiarly enclosed for himself. Sacrilege is double theft. Ninthly, murder. Adam was a public person, and all his posterity were involved and wrapped up in him, and he, by sinning, at once destroyed all his posterity, if free grace did not interpose. If Abel's blood cried so loud in God's ears, "The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground," Genesis 4:10, how loudly did the blood of all Adam's posterity cry against him for vengeance. Tenthly, presumption. Adam presumed of God's mercy. He blessed himself, saying he should have peace. He thought, though he did transgress, he should not die, that God would sooner reverse his decree than punish him. This was great presumption. What a heinous sin was Adam's breach of covenant. One sin may have many sins in it. We are apt to have slight thoughts of sin, and say it is but a little one. How many sins were in Adam's sin? Oh, take heed of any sin. As in one volume there may be many works bound up, so there may be many sins in one sin. 3. The dreadfulness of the effect. It has corrupted man's nature. How rank is that poison, a drop whereof could poison a whole sea, and how deadly is that sin of Adam that could poison all mankind, and bring a curse upon them, till it be taken away by him who was made a curse for us. Part 4, Original Sin. Question 16. Did all mankind fall in Adam's first transgression? Answer, the covenant being made with Adam, not only for himself, but for his posterity, all mankind descending from him by ordinary generation, sinned in him, and fell with him in his first transgression. By one man's sin entered into the world, and death by sin, etc., Romans 5:12. Adam being a representative person, while he stood, we stood. When he fell, we sinned in Adam, so it is in the text, in whom all have sinned. Adam was the head of mankind, and being guilty, we are guilty, as the children of a traitor have their blood stained. All of us, says Augustine, sinned in Adam, because we were part of Adam. You ask, if when Adam fell, all mankind fell with him, why, when one angel fell, did not all of them fall? The case is not the same. The angels had no relation to one another. They are called morning stars. The stars have no dependence upon one another, but as it was otherwise with us, we were in Adam's loins. As a child is a branch of the parent, we were part of Adam. Therefore, when he sinned, we sinned. How, you ask, is Adam's sin made ours? 1, by imputation. The Pelagians of old held that Adam's transgression is hurtful to posterity by imitation only, not by imputation. But the text, in whom all have sinned, confutes that. 2, Adam's sin is ours by propagation. Not only is the guilt of Adam's sin imputed to us, but the depravity and corruption of his nature is transmitted to us, as poison is carried from the fountain to the cistern. This is that which we call original sin. In sin did my mother conceive me, Psalm 51:5. Adam's leprosy cleaves to us as Naaman's leprosy did to Gehazi, 2 Kings 5:27. This original concupiscence is called, first, the old man in Ephesians 4:22. It is said to be the old man, not that it is weak, as old men are, but for its long standing and for its deformity. In old age the fair blossoms of beauty fall, so original sin is the old man, because it has withered our beauty and made us deformed in God's eye. Second, original concupiscence is called the law of sin in Romans 7:25. Original sin has the power of a law which binds the subject to allegiance. Men must needs do what sin will have them, when they have both the love of sin to draw them and the law of sin to force them. First point, in original sin there is something privative and something positive. First, something privative, the lack of that righteousness which should be ours. We have lost that excellent quintessential frame of soul which we once had. Sin has cut the lock of original purity where our strength lay. Second, something positive. Original sin has contaminated and defiled our virgin nature. It was death among the Romans to poison the springs. Original sin has poisoned the spring of our nature. It has turned beauty into leprosy. It has turned the azure brightness of our souls into midnight darkness. Original sin has become co-natural to us. A man by nature cannot but sin. Though there were no devil to tempt, no bad examples to imitate, yet there is such an innate principle in him that he cannot forbear sinning. 2 Peter 2:14, who cannot cease to sin, as a horse that is lame cannot go without halting. In original sin there is, firstly, an aversion from good. Man has a desire to be happy, yet opposes that which should promote his happiness. He has a disgust of holiness. He hates to be reformed. Since we fell from God, we have no mind to return to him. Secondly, a propensity to evil. If, as the Pelagians say, there is so much goodness in us since the fall, why is there not as much natural proneness to good as there is to evil? Our experience tells us that the natural bias of the soul is to that which is bad. The very heathens by the light of nature saw this. Heracles, the philosopher, said, "It is grafted in us by nature to sin." Men roll sin as honey under their tongue. They drink iniquity as water, Job 15:16. like a hydropsical person that thirsts for drink and is not satisfied. They have a kind of drought on them. They thirst for sin. Though they are tired out in committing sin, yet they sin. Ephesians 4:19, they weary themselves to commit iniquity. As a man that follows his game while he is weary, yet delights in it, and cannot leave it off. Jeremiah 9:5. Though God has set so many flaming swords in the way to stop men in their sin, yet they go on in it, which all shows what a strong appetite they have to the forbidden fruit. Point 2, that we may further see the nature of original sin, consider, first, the universality of it. It has, as poison, diffused itself into all the parts and powers of the soul. The whole head is sick, and the whole heart is faint, Isaiah 1:5. Like a sick patient that has no part sound, his liver is swelled, his feet are gangrened, his lungs are perished. Such infected, gangrened souls have we, till Christ, who has made a medicine of his blood, cures us. Firstly, original sin has depraved the intellectual part. As in the creation, darkness was upon the face of the deep, Genesis 1:2, so it is with the understanding. Darkness is upon the face of this deep. As there is salt in every drop of the sea, bitterness in every branch of wormwood, so there is sin in every faculty. The mind is darkened. We know little of God. Ever since Adam did eat of the tree of knowledge, and his eyes were opened, we lost our eyesight. Besides ignorance in the mind, there is error and mistake. We do not judge rightly of things. We put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter, Isaiah 5:20. Besides this, there is much pride, superciliousness, and prejudice, and many fleshly reasonings. How long shall thy vain thoughts lodge within thee, Jeremiah 4:14. Secondly, original sin has defiled the heart. The heart is deadly wicked, Jeremiah 17:9. It is a lesser hell. In the heart are legions of lusts, obdurateness, infidelity, hypocrisy, sinful attestations. It boils as the sea with passion and revenge. Madness is in their heart while they live, Ecclesiastes 9:3. The heart is the devil's workshop, where all mischief is framed. Thirdly, the will. Contumacy is the seat of rebellion. The sinner crosses God's will to fulfill his own. We will burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, Jeremiah 44:17. There is rooted enmity in the will against holiness. It is like an iron sinew. It refuses to bend to God. Where is then the freedom of the will, when it is so full not only of indisposition, but opposition to what is spiritual? Fourthly, the affections. These, as the strings of a viol, are out of tune. They are the lesser wheels, which are strongly carried by the will, the master wheel. Our affections are set on wrong objects. Our love is set on sin, our joy on the creature. Our affections are naturally as a sick man's appetite, who desires things which are noxious and hurtful to him. He calls for wine in a fever. So we have impure lustings instead of holy longings. Second, the adhesion of original sin. It cleaves to us as blackness to the skin of the Ethiopian, so that we cannot get rid of it. Paul shook off the viper on his hand into the fire, but we cannot shake off this inbred corruption. It may be compared to a wild fig tree growing on a wall, the roots of which are pulled up, and yet there are some fibers of it in the joints of the stonework which will not be eradicated, but will sprout forth till the wall be pulled in pieces. Original concupiscence comes not as a lodger for a night, but as an indweller. Romans 7:17, sin which dwelleth in me. It is a evil spirit that haunts us wherever we go. The Canaanite would dwell in the land. Joshua 17:12. Third, original sin retards and hinders us in the exercise of God's worship. Whence is all that dullness and deadness in religion? It is the fruit of original sin. This it is that rocks us asleep in duty. The good that I would, I do not. Romans 7:19. Sin is compared to a weight in Hebrews 12:1. A man that has weights tied to his legs cannot run fast. It's like that fish Pliny speaks of, a sea lamprey that cleaves to the keel of a ship and hinders its progress when it's under sail. Fourth, original sin, though latent in the soul, and as a spring which runs underground often breaks forth unexpectedly. Christian, thou canst not believe that evil which is in thy heart, and which will break forth suddenly if God should leave thee. Is thy servant a dog that he should do this great thing? 2 Kings 8:13. Hazael could not believe he had such a root of bitterness in his heart that he should rip up the women with child. Is thy servant a dog? Yes, and worse than a dog, when that original corruption within is stirred up. If one had come to Peter and said, Peter, within a few hours thou wilt deny Christ, he would have said, Is thy servant a dog? But alas, Peter did not know his own heart, nor how far that corruption within would prevail upon him. The sea may be calm and look clear, but when the wind blows, how it rages and foams. So, though now thy heart seems good, yet when temptation blows, how may original sin discover itself, making thee foam with lust and passion? Who would have thought to have found adultery in David, and drunkenness in Noah, and cursing in Job? If God leave a man to himself, how suddenly and scandalously may original sin break forth in the holiest men on the earth. Fifth, original sin mixes and incorporates itself with our duties and graces. Firstly, with our duties. As the hand which is paralytic or palsied cannot move without shaking, as wanting some inward strength, so we cannot do any holy action without sinning, as wanting a principle of original righteousness. As whatever the leper touched became unclean, such a leprosy is original sin. It defiles our prayers and tears. We cannot write without blotting. Though I do not say that the holy duties and good works of the regenerate are sins, for that were to reproach the Spirit of Christ, by which they are wrought, yet this I say, that the best works of the godly have sin cleaving to them. Christ's blood alone makes atonement for our holy things. Secondly, with our graces. There is some unbelief mixed with faith, lukewarmness with zeal, pride with humility. As bad lungs cause an asthma or shortness of breath, so original corruption has infected our hearts, so that our graces breathe very faintly. Sixth, original sin is a vigorous, active principle within us. It does not lie still, but is ever exciting and stirring us up to evil. It is an inmate, very unquiet. What I hate, that do I, Romans 7:15. How came Paul to do so? Original sin irritated and stirred him up to it. Original sin is like quicksilver, always in motion. When we're asleep, sin is awake in the fancy. Original sin sets the head plotting evil and the hands working it. It has in it a principle of restlessness, not of tranquility. It is like the pulse, ever beating. Seventh, original sin is the cause of all actual sin, the kindling wood of sin. It is the womb in which all actual sins are conceived. Hence come murderers, adulteries, rapines. Though actual sins may be more scandalous, yet original sin more heinous. The cause is more than the effect. Eighth, it is not perfectly cured in this life. Though grace does subdue sin, yet it does not wholly remove it. Though we are like Christ, having the first fruits of the Spirit, yet we are unlike him, having the remainders of the flesh. There are two nations in the womb. Original sin is like that tree in Daniel 4:23, though the branches of it were hewn down and the main body of it, yet the stumps and root of the tree were left. Though the Spirit still be weakening and hewing down sin in the godly, yet the stump of original sin is left. It is a seed that will not, in this life, be dried up. And thus far the reading of Thomas Watson's A Body of Divinity.
This Reformation audio track is a production of Stillwater's Revival Books. You are welcome to make copies and give them to those in need. SWRB makes thousands of classic Reformation resources available, free and for sale, in audio, video, and printed formats. It is likely that the sermon or book that you just listened to is also available on cassette or video, or as a printed book or booklet. Our many free resources, as well as our complete mail-order catalog, containing thousands of classic and contemporary Puritan and Reformed books, tapes, and videos at great discounts, is on the web at www.swrb.com. We can also be reached by email at swrb@swrb.com, by phone at 780-450-3730, by fax at 780-468-1096, or by mail at 4710-37A Avenue, Edmonton, that's Edmonton, Alberta, abbreviated capital A, capital B, Canada, T6L3T5. You may also request a free printed catalog. And remember that John Calvin, in defending the Reformation's regulative principle of worship, or what is sometimes called the scriptural law of worship, commenting on the words of God, which I commanded them not, neither came into my heart, from his commentary on Jeremiah 7:31, writes, God here cuts off from men every occasion for making evasions, since he condemns by this one phrase, I have not commanded them, whatever the Jews devised. There is then no other argument needed to condemn superstitions than that they are not commanded by God. For when men allow themselves to worship God according to their own fancies, and attend not to his commands, they pervert true religion. And if this principle was adopted by the Papists, all those fictitious modes of worship in which they absurdly exercise themselves would fall to the ground. It is indeed a horrible thing for the Papists to seek to discharge their duties towards God by performing their own superstitions. There is an immense number of them, as it is well known, and as it manifestly appears. Were they to admit this principle, that we cannot rightly worship God except by obeying his word, they would be delivered from their deep abyss of error. The prophet's words, then, are very important, when he says that God had commanded no such thing, and that it never came to his mind, as though he had said that men assume too much wisdom when they devise what he never required, nay, what he never knew.